I'm John Yarrington, CEO of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a 501c6 not-for-profit trade association dedicated to protecting, promoting, and advancing the direct-to-consumer and performance-driven marketing industries. And on behalf of the entire PDMI family, it's my pleasure to welcome you back for yet another fun episode of an exciting episode of the PDMI Take 20. As a reminder, the PDMI Take 20 is a quick-hitting roundtable discussion led by industry experts on trending topics, all in roughly 20 minutes. Today, we're joined by two amazing friends, industry friends, including Mark Orton of Kingstar Direct and Jenny Parrish of Division D. And together, we'll be taking a look at a fourth episode of a recurring series on how performance marketers are reaching different generations of consumers, with today's focus being dedicated to Generation Z. However, before we get started, please allow me to do a little housekeeping. If you'd like to ask a question, we encourage you to do so. Please use your questions tab located on your control panel. Also, please know you're welcome to ask questions throughout today's conversation, but we'll hold all the replies to the end of our discussion. All right, folks. With that said, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. In a world of KPIs, he's the ROI. He's the fearless Chris Foster. Chris is Vice President of New Business at a modern Postcard, a direct marketing agency located in Carlsbad, California. In addition to his day job, Chris is the chairperson of PDMI's Brand Response Council, and he's the host of the podcast, Men, Folks, Journeys. As always, Chris, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today with us. Thank you so much. And for the 125th time, because today is the 125th episode, take it away, my friend. Take it away.
Boom. I got it, Johnny. Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. Welcome in, Jenny, and welcome in, Mark. Really excited to talk about Generation Z. So like John mentioned, this is a series we've done figuring out different characteristics, primary attributes, and some of the cultural norms that are happening with different generations and how that affects them as generational behaviors and also in terms of their purchase ideas and their purchasing identities. Each generation is slightly different. And this time we're going to dive into Generation Z. We love Generation Z. They're here and they're loving it. They have or have already graduated from college or trade schools. So they're ready to move into the adult working world and the adult purchasing world. And they are a tsunami of buying power and marketing savvy. These are the cleverest consumers on the planet because they understand when they're being marketed to and how they're being marketed to. They're also the most diverse generation in American history, and they're ready to not only buy, but they're also ready to shape the world economically, politically, socially, and culturally. So this is a generation born between 1997 and 2012. So they're entering kindergarten when Facebook is launched. They begin driving with the advent of TikTok. And now they're poised to change the face of retail shopping and consumer behavior. So let's get some statistics before we jump into our panelists. Firstly, 68 million Generation Zs. 40% of US consumers in terms of the activity going on with their buying behavior. $150 billion in buying power. And for everyone here who's looking at the next generation of workers and hiring, by 2030, which is not that far away, it's going to be a third of the workforce coming from Generation Z. And they're 26% of the global population. So it's not just in the US that Generation Z is so powerful, but just think about that. More than 1 out of 4 folks worldwide are in this generation. That's going to be phenomenal influence over the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. So we're going to be talking about how the performance marketers think about Generation Z, the impact this generation has on performance marketers, but know that that's in the context of a broader global and cultural shift that this generation is going to push forward. I've got 2 children that are both in Generation Z, and I can tell you they're ready to change the world and they're ready to make things happen as they move into their own adulting and their own purchasing behaviors. So Jenny, we're going to start with you. Do you have clients that focus on Generation Z?
Yeah, absolutely. A big portion of our clients are now shifting budgets towards Gen Z because they're not just future consumers, they're shaping current buying behaviors, which is exactly what you mentioned, right? We've seen this across categories like education, retail, wellness, even financial services. What's different is how they're consuming the content. Short form, peer-led, experience-based. So focus on platforms like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, connected TV placements, that blend of entertainment with authenticity. Gen Z has built in radar for what feels forced. So the creative and the media have to feel really organic in this world. It's something where we're starting to see a really large shift towards influencer marketing specifically. And so we have started to get really creative in regards to how to amplify that organic, authentic creator content in order to reach this generation.
I love that. I'd like to just pause a little bit and dive into that phrase you just used where you called built-in radar. I called it marketing savvy. I like your phrase better. It's as if they're natively attuned to when they're being marketed to.
Yes, exactly. And that's where they're going to spot out when you're trying to inject buzzwords that are really hot right now, or even by the time marketing is catching up, it's about 3 months too late. And so they spot out those type of nuances that I think brands, agencies really have to focus on, is how do we really create an authentic connection? And that's really what's going to resonate with this particular generation.
Word.
I love it.
Right.
No, it's so true. And if I hear 6, 7 one more time, I think I'm gonna go crazy. But yeah, these are the type of things that are being implemented into the marketing world, and it's important for us to take cues and figure out how to really connect there. So
love it. So Mark, are there any of this generation that still thinks linear TV is like a thing? Or do they think of it as linear versus connected? Do they make any distinction in their minds at all between what linear TV actually is and isn't?
I think there's probably a small amount, but as they've grown up and they've been more, of course, digitally in tune, I think now that it's being brought into more of a focus of a total TV, of course, kind of landscape. Whether they think linear TV, maybe they look at that as being like, hey, that's the news and sports channel, because we do know that linear TV really indexes high on news and sports. So it's like, that's where we go for that. And then we go to the Netflixes and the Disneys for everything else. And they can kind of see it as, when they're looking at it these days, probably it's just one total TV, aspect, in the fact that, hey, got my linear subscription here, streaming platforms here, YouTube's there as well, and everything on that. So when you're consuming it through the TV, and it's almost just like one big nature now. And we've seen that shift in the older demographics, a little slower, but as it's bleeding in, now that we're getting into the Gen Z, that is just being sped up, and that's like, right now they are definitely consuming that heavier than they're consuming linear TV. And like I said, probably just if they're going to linear TV, it is likely for just some news, sports, and that on that aspect.
I think that's really insightful, Mark, and I think that for you to make that distinction, that they go to quote unquote linear just for the content, right? The news and sports, that's where I find this. In the Wayback Machine, we remember when networks tried to brand themselves. NBC way back, and this will date me, had their must-see Thursday or whatever that lineup was, where it was kind of, hey, you come to NBC and you're going to plant yourself for a couple of hours on my network. Or CBS touted, we've got this show and this show and this show. We're the most watched network, and like the network was a brand in and of itself. It seems to me now Generation Z has no time or interest in the brand of a network, right, Mark? It's kind of like they're going to go watch their sports on here, and then afterwards they're going to go see an episode of Black Orchid.
Exactly. You're just seeing that with content, and you're seeing that with how networks market themselves. I know you're seeing, just downward, and those younger skewed stations that were previously targeted to, the younger generation. There's just no for them now, and that they would be moving over to more of a connected, where they can just have ease of access to content and listen to it on demand as opposed to watching it on a linear based subscription. So you're just going to be seeing that. I know, especially with like, just going on the kids networks, but the Gen Zs now, as they're going up, kids networks essentially has been a dying breed on the linear side of things, just because of the ease of access to the Netflixes and the Disney Pluses of the world, where it is just so easily available as opposed to going on the linear and having a kid sit down in front of the TV there. So you're just going to see that with, when you're seeing these younger skewed networks, it's just, it's becoming in also to what is more efficient from a brand's perspective. If you're going on the linear and you really want to hit that target demographic, it's a lot more efficient almost to do it on connected versus linear TV. So you got to kind of go into how do you play the best of both worlds.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So Jenny, I'd like to go back to you. You talked about, the rise of, influencer marketing and how TikTok is this perfect connection of short and it's peer-led and there's a clear call to action. That's actually, I think, pretty exciting, right? I think it's changing marketing in a very different direction. It's not marketing from the brand, it's actually marketing from the people. What excites you about marketing to this generation of customers? But also then, what makes you wary and what makes you pause and what makes you think that you have to be a little bit more careful and cautious?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think what excites me the most is, Generation Z is bold. They know who they are and what they care about. You can really lean into creativity and humor and purpose. They love seeing brands take a stand or do something fresh, not the same ad template recycled for every generation. And so I think that it really broadens our capabilities of thinking outside the box, understanding what really is going to resonate to this particular generation. And I love that kind of new way of connecting with the consumer in this particular generation. But with that said, what makes me wary is their speed. They move incredibly fast, trends shift daily, and loyalty isn't guaranteed. You can mail a message one month and feel outdated the next. So we always have to tell clients, don't chase every viral trend, build something that's consistent and real. Gen Z will forgive imperfection, but not in authenticity. We really want to see that they are consistent within their messaging and what they truly stand for. And I think that's when they will create loyalty. We had one particular brand that was admittedly saying that our customers, we're aging out of our customers. We really need to dive into this specific generation that is the new wave of consumers. How do we start to shift and model to make sure that we're connecting with them? And this is exactly the advice that we're giving them. So
that's great advice. So I want to touch on a couple of things. I love that you mentioned this concept of building your own brand instead of chasing trends. Chasing trends is a fool's errand because the trend will change quickly. And then you realize that you're showing up as not being authentic when you aren't yourself, right? But you also mentioned about loyalty, and I think it touches on something you talked about, Jenny, with taking a stand. And Mark, I want to ask you this. We've seen all the research where 80% of Gen Zs especially will focus and purchase from a brand that align with their social or cultural values, and that loyalty has to be earned all the time from that brand. Are you talking about that with your clients? I mean, you don't have to necessarily be political, but they are looking for brands that actually have, like you said, Jenny, an authentic point of view and align with some kind of purpose or mission beyond just getting a transaction.
Yeah, we do talk to clients about that. So we always kind of look in and say, hey, at certain points, you got to be a little bit cautious on that too, because as Jenny was saying, you don't just want to chase the latest viral trend and make sure and lose authenticity on that. Like, we saw so many brands, especially I want to take an example, was last year with the Taylor Swift phenomenon. So many brands I saw chasing that, and it just lost that. It was just like, you're just another company just using this as a marketing ploy. So you definitely don't want to, yeah. You did see a lot of that. So, you do want to make sure you are reaching them with that authenticity. So making sure you're using a bit of a cautious approach. You got to make sure you're going in and, you know, does this align with our key consumer as well? We want to make sure that though we need to chase the new consumer and the Gen Z, we also don't want to alienate our current consumer as well, and, you know, disalign from them as well. So if you're going to go do that, I think it's coming into, hey, we do want to make sure we're aligning with, you know, their beliefs and their social norms, and making sure we are resonating well with them. But we also need to make sure we're not like overstepping it or taking too much of an overtone on it, where you start getting backlash or anything like that, because then you might have to just start treading water carefully, because we've seen this with some brands just taking it a bit step too far, where it, you know, you're not going to resonate with the new Gen Z, and you're going to also have a negative effect on your current key consumers. So, you know, taking it back and saying, hey, what's best for the brand and what's best to, you know, reach them is what we're making sure of, and making sure, like, if when you're doing it, making sure you are taking those steps on a bit of a cautious level.
I like that idea because, you know, it's what I think intellectually, it's a really interesting exercise for a brand to go through, different than they had before, right? Where you almost got to think about principle over preference, right? The idea of what do we stand for as a brand, and how then does that appeal to other generations, instead of saying we need to be appealing to these generations, so let's figure that out. Right, it's kind of like they have to, and then build our mission around that. Everyone remembers the debacle that Pepsi launched years ago, and so that to me was really indicative of them not understanding authenticity and what people actually care about and respond to. And I think that authenticity goes to with the data of the generation itself. I mentioned before, it's the most diverse generation. And so from the census, this is the most diverse generation in the US. The quote unquote white population will no longer be the majority in the US. And this is starting with Generation Z and is continuing with Generation Alpha. So Jenny, I guess I'll ask you, what does this require of brands in terms of their awareness and their expression, the images, the messaging? What do they have to pay attention to?
Yeah, no, it requires brands to really listen. Gen Z doesn't just want to see diversity, they expect it in casting, language, even the cultural references used. They're the first generation that doesn't see diversity as a campaign theme, it's just life. So brands have to, it's just life. So brands have to get it right from the inside out. That means having diverse voices in the room when creative decisions are being made, not just in the ad. And actually at PDMI West more recently, you know, there was a focus group around reaching the Hispanic audience, and they echoed that same sentiment where don't just translate the language. Ensure that it makes sense, that someone that has that cultural background can really understand the messaging that is going to be leading and really reaching this particular generation. You know, when it comes to Gen Z, you know, they want to feel seen, not targeted.
Sure.
So it's important to kind of leverage those cultural cues and humor that actually resonate and connect with their particular culture. So that's going to be really critical when it comes to that. And again, it goes back to the same theme of authenticity, right? It is not just the translation or the diversification in who they're seeing in that particular ad, but are there very specific nuances that make them feel like I can be connected to this brand, I can be connected to this moment that I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah, and that it is authentic. So as a point of note, my two daughters, I mentioned they're total Gen Z. One was born in 1999, the other 2001, right surrounding the millennium, you know, the turn of the century. And they went to a high school here in San Diego. It's a public high school. It's a performing arts high school. So it had an artistic bent to it. Okay, it's an audition-only art school, but they did the census within the because it's a public school. They've got to have all these, you know, public records. There was not a single ethnic majority in that high school. And this is what my daughters are used to. This is normal to them, right? This is kind of how they work within the world. And so for them, that kind of attention from a brand is something that, like you said, Jenny, not only they expect, but they're surprised if a brand doesn't pay attention to that, right? And I love that phrase, being seen, not targeted, because like you said, Gen Z's got the radar, and they know if they're actually being, you know, if they're being seen and acknowledged, right? No matter who they are. I think, Mark, I'd like to, go back to you on this, because translating some of that cultural diversity, translating the authenticity, in the end of the day for performance marketing, leads to some channel, right? There's some touch that they're doing, whether it's a CTV ad or it's a TikTok push or it's on Instagram. Notice I didn't say Facebook. but so as they start, as you start talking with clients and you start thinking about the media mix that they want to deploy for Gen Z, where are you steering them, and what's your advice?
Well, not to Facebook, because too old apparently, the Gen Z we are. I remember asking my my cousin's daughter, I was like, "Oh, do you have Facebook?" And they're like, "We're not like 50." And I was like, "What?" Like, so, yeah, so okay, so I don't think Facebook, but actually I'm not going to say that entirely, but no, when looking at an omni-channel approach, and looking at how we're going to change it, so it's going to be vastly different than how you would target like an older skewed demographic. And you got to look at, the media consumption habits along with, what is resonating well with them. And then you got to, cover your basis on how to successfully deploy it, which would be, we got to look at what their interest is and what's piquing their, how to resonate fully, and whether that is the influencer marketing. That has been such a big thing with this this target, is the influencer marketing is so huge right now, and whether it's getting in on that, and whether it's like, doing those YouTube shorts, like over, resonating with that and aligning your brand with, like, I know, like, there's so many ones of that, like, Mr. Beast, for example, is so big on that demographic and that Gen Z thing. So, using those kind of like influencer marketings, podcasting is another one where you see a lot of influencers aligning themselves with that, Instagram. So making sure you're successfully navigating those and, using those for, successful targeting of that demographic. However, you also got to make sure you're still getting that awareness, and, that's where top of funnel media comes into effect, and whether it's out of home or whether it is connected in linear TV to reach your target, because you're going to have to reach them outside of that, or else, with awareness, we see word of mouth being so big amongst this, Gen Z demographic. And if you're missing your target and just going so narrow on the bottom of the funnel on these, digital native channels, it won't bring about that on the awareness side on the top of funnel, where, it gets the buzzwords going and gets people talking about it. So you want to make sure, you're using that successfully, top of funnel media down to bottom funnel to, convert and get your target with the Gen Z to, align with your brand.
I love it. That's a great answer. So I have a final question for everybody. Jenny, I'll start with you. Kind of thought leadership hat, projection hat. How do you see Gen Z influencing and shaping consumer behavior in the years to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're completely rewriting it. They're not separating entertainment, shopping, and social anymore. It's all happening at once.
That's interesting.
They might see a skincare product on TikTok, click to buy it instantly, and then post about it that night. And I think they're also expecting transparency, from sustainability to pricing to how brands treat their employees. They'll call you out if something feels off. I think they're pushing everyone from brands, agencies, and even data partners to be more human. And I think it's a good thing. One brand we work with started showing real employees in their content instead of models, and engagement spiked. That's the Gen Z effect. They want real, not rehearsed. And that's where we have started to pivot towards, as Mark mentioned, influencer is kind of everything with this particular generation. So now we've started to carry across that creator content to digital out of home, to CTV commercials. We're starting to see that particular format and that type of creative really hits with this particular generation far more than kind of that polished ad. So that's where I start to see them really changing that entire consumer landscape and how brands are going to be interacting with this huge rush of, this particular generation coming in as our new buying pool.
I think that's so interesting, and I think it's really insightful that you're calling out the blending of entertainment, commerce, and social. as they're not separate activities mentally, but it's actually wrapped in a unified experience for Gen Z, and that's something they're accustomed to and very comfortable with, not only seeing but also doing. Mark, what do you see them shaping the world as?
Yeah, you're seeing the trends, of course, on them being so digitally focused, and I think it's going to be coming down to like relative ease of access to getting, getting their products or getting their with their brands, and making sure that that is their access, and getting their attention is going to be the key thing, and whether that is through the influencer marketing or social media, it's going to be, they're going to be a hard to reach demographic at this time. Like, it's going to be tough to reach them, and if you want to get their attention, and if they're not attuned to what the messaging you're sending across, you're just going to lose them. So making sure that they are reached properly will be key. And then when we're looking at them as a consumer, having an ease of access. We know that this demographic and this generation is very, digitally native. So ensuring that you're up to speed on that and having an ease of access, making sure they're able to get their product, making sure it's a good product, making sure that, everything goes smooth well from from the whole messaging to getting it and to actual getting the product. Because if not, we know now how, with, how the Amazons of the world, when you used to buy something in retail, how difficult it was to return it and go through all that process. Now it's just like, hey, get it, don't like it, return it. And then you post about it being on a bad review, and then it doesn't go well with your brand. So making sure that, you're covering that, and, making sure that you are reaching them in the proper way, because, this consumer is, it's the future, and we don't want to we don't want to neglect them.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very well put. And, there's a brand called Quince. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But Quince is actually, their entire marketing strategy to me seems pointed towards Gen Z in terms of not just the influencer, the posts they're doing, but to your point, Mark, their return policy. It's returns for a year as long as it's not dorm worn or damaged or anything like that. And that's just what they expect, right? And I think, I'm really curious to see when they start getting more money and earning more income and spending more, what they're going to be spending their money on, right? I'm really curious to see that. We know that Gen Xers spend their money on their house and travel, and we know that Gen Z is spending money on ? Right? The data still isn't out there in terms of what categories they're moving towards, and I'm really curious to see as they move through their own life stages what that looks like. Will they be having children later in life? Maybe, right? We know that happened with with the millennials. Millennials in particular have children later in life. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means they have fewer children, right? It means that they buy homes later in their life, right? And that also means that it changes the whole population structure for that generation as their kids start moving up and out. So it's academic, I know, but to me it's really interesting, because as we start seeing how people buy and change the way they buy, it's going to affect performance brands for the next 5 to 10 years. And if anyone's been working for a while, 5 years goes by in an eye blink. And speaking of an eye blink, this Take 20 went by in an eye blink. It's already half past the hour. So Johnny, what kind of questions do we have?
We've got some great questions from the audience. Let's see if we can kind of fire through these pretty quickly. Here's the first one for you. Gen Z moves very fast across platforms. How are marketers tracking conversions in such a fragmented landscape?
Yeah, we certainly can take that. I know it sounds simplistic, but our infrastructure is really dependent on pixel tracking. So attribution is very critical for us to understand, between different tactics, which one is actually resonating. How do we shift those particular impressions to the right type of platform? And so although it is fragmented, particularly with Gen Z, we are seeing consolidation in things like Instagram and TikTok, YouTube. It's typically going to lean towards short form video, influencer content. So we have really honed in on those particular platforms. And fortunately, we are highly connected from our dashboards and our mechanisms that allow us to track that, as closely as we possibly can to make the adjustments and optimizations to make sure the impressions are going to the right place. Mark, I don't know if you have a different experience on the linear side or other media channels that you're leveraging.
Yeah, no, exactly, like pixel tracking is just so huge now, like, making sure we're using that, especially when it's targeting a younger demographic on the connected side of things or on any of the digital channels that we are running on. So yeah, it's to your point, it is like, making sure we are monitoring properly, monitoring to those conversions. And we do know it can be fragmented, but yeah, that would just, any more data, the better on this demographic.
Great feedback. Thank you both. Appreciate that. Here's another one for you guys to take a look at. Are there any specific verticals that are particularly a hit with Generation Z? And conversely, are there any particular verticals that are kind of struggling with Generation Z, especially compared to previous generation? When I refer to verticals, I'm thinking like home and houseware, travel, entertainment, that kind of stuff.
I haven't really seen a particular industry that really couldn't resonate with this particular generation, unless obviously it's something that is meant for an older demographic. But we have seen consistently everything from CPG products to subprime financial, education. Obviously, this is a huge generation for anything that is beauty, skincare related,
Right.
jewelry, clothes. All of that resonates actually really, really strongly with this particular generation. So unless the product is intended, I think, for an older demographic, I don't know, like a Facebook shortcut or how to, that more than likely won't hit with this generation. But when it comes to being creative on how we're presenting any type of industry, I think that there's a way to get that message across multiple industries. I don't necessarily see anything that can potentially be a difficult place to connect with them. Maybe B2B is one that needs some finesse. We do specialize in B2B as well. And so that might take a little bit more of a creative eye to try to reach a B2B product. But other than that, I think across those typical consumer product lines, we're definitely seeing success across multiple industries.
Anecdotally, what I can see is these small niche, to Jenny's point, consumer care products, personal care products, but also small niche health food products. So this is a generation that is very aware of toxic foods, right? This is not a Pop-Tart generation, right? And so if you see in one of the examples, an anecdotal example of that is the Magic Spoon brand. So that's a cereal brand that has come out, which kind of echoes, the cereals back in the day of, Fruit Loops and Cocoa Puffs and all this toxic chemical crap that kids used to eat. But it's all organic, it's low sugar, it's protein, blah, blah, blah. So I would not be surprised if there's a big push on that. Another good example is a company that developed the RX bar has now produced called the Dave bar. The Dave bar is very high in protein, completely all natural, and they are just selling out, especially to Gen Zs who are going on TikTok and looking at some influencers talking about these type of health food, personal, cooking that you can do at home to make your own stuff. I would not be surprised if you are a brand that focuses on healthy supplements, healthy ingredients, that you're going to find a great home with Gen Z.
So Chris, I hear you're right. What you're saying, 2 Pop-Tarts and a Mountain Dew is not a good breakfast. Let's do one more question together.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to touch on Chris, like to Chris's point on the health aspect of that. It is a generation that is very more, like we're finding, is definitely consuming a lot more health products and being very, aware of that, because you see that through all the influencer marketing, and that has had an effect, I think, in one vertical in particular, and that'd be the alcohol vertical category, because you have seen that alcohol is, it's trending down amongst those Gen Zs, and we're seeing non-alcoholic products now shoot through the roof, and you're seeing like you go in the liquor store, you see a full section just dedicated to non-alcoholic. Back in the day, it was like one brand, right, of like non-alcoholic beer, and now there's so many different options nowadays. So yeah, to your point, that is probably one vertical where you're seeing these major alcohol brands pivoting to get into that, because we know how health conscious this generation is.
Great point.
Yeah, great feedback all the way around the horn, guys. Thank you so much. Let's do one more. this question was actually dedicated at Jenny, but I think, Mark, you're more than welcome to answer this as well. And it's because of something you said during the conversation, Jenny. This person said, you mentioned amplifying the authenticity of influencers, but once authenticity becomes something we amplify, doesn't it cease to be authentic? And how do you balance the optimizing performance with preserving genuine voice, especially when audiences may not have a baseline for what's real anymore?
Yeah, it's actually a great question because once you try to manufacture authenticity, it loses its meaning, right? For me, amplifying authenticity isn't about scripting or polishing an influencer. It's about helping their real story reach more of the right people. So instead of changing what they say, we focus on context, the where, not the what. For example, if a creator naturally talks about self-care, we'll amplify that same content through programmatic CTV or paid social. So it finds audiences already engaging in similar spaces. We're not tweaking their tone or voice, we're just scaling their truth. The balance comes down to alignment. If the partnership is a fit from the start, meaning the influencer actually uses or believes in the product, then optimization just extends that. It just extends something genuine. If it's not, no amount of boosting can make it feel real. And you're right, audiences don't always know what's real anymore, but they feel it. And you can't fake that gut reaction. So we look at authenticity as performance levers too, because when something truly feels real, the data always reflects it. And so that's why it's really critical to partner or really lead with your influencer and creator acquisition allow them to do what they do best. Let them interact with the product. Let them really craft that message to their audience. And that's when it kind of resonates, and amplifying it is just sharing that same truth. It's not necessarily, rewriting it or manufacturing it in a way that isn't going to resonate with this particular generation. Hopefully that answers that question.
It did for me. Mark, you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think Jenny hit it pretty well there.
And also,
Right.
Jenny, you got me interested though, because it could be that there are imperfections with the product, or there's some flaws, or there's some things that aren't great, and the influencer speaks to that. I wish you would do this, but that's okay because blah, blah, blah. That, I think, rings so true and lands so well to that audience where they know that the influencer is being just truthful.
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that making that recommendation, highlighting what they liked about the particular product or service, but also saying, maybe in their next generation, they'll add this, that is something that could still be spun as not necessarily a negative reflection on the particular brand, but something that could be room for improvement and growth, which again, it's going to resonate really well with this particular generation.
Let me come on back in with this group here and do some closing out. First of all, we flew through that. We didn't do a take 20, we did a take 40 because you guys had so much to share, which was awesome. So thank you very much for being here and sharing. What a phenomenal session, Chris, Jenny, Mark. I mean, what a great conversation. Thank you so much. So folks, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I personally did today. Before we close out, I'd like to take a moment to invite each and every one of you to join us for our next episode of the PDMI Take 20. Hosted on Wednesday, October 29th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, which means it's almost Halloween, which means it's almost November, which means it's almost the end of the year, which means it's going to be PDMI East in a blink of an eye. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I'd also like to remind you that our spring conference, PDMI East, is scheduled for April 13th through April 15th in Miami at the beautiful Eden Rock Hotel. Think toes in the sand, warm sun, awesome water. We can't wait to see you guys down there. To get your badges and hotel and information about that, please visit our website, thepdmi.com, thepdmi.com. And finally, class is in session. I'd like to encourage each and every one of you to take a look at our all-new PDMI University with 10 new powerful courses. This online and on-demand program is designed to elevate your game. With that said, folks, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed your experience with this group. Phenomenal information, and we'll see you at the next PDMI Take 20.